Hi, I'm Sydnee Visser, and my presentation is on Chief Ethics Officers, what and why. In my presentation, I'm going to start off by talking about what exactly Chief Ethics Officers are and why they are needed. I'll then go on to talk about the benefits that they provide the firms that they work for, and then I'll conclude with their specific responsibilities. Now, over the years, we have been overwhelmed with the amount of stories that involve corporate greed, unethical behavior, and all these business scandals. And when WorldCom and Enron hit, that made everything even worse. And it really brought ethics to the forefront. It made ethics a very popular topic because firms realized that in order to succeed and in order to obtain that consumer loyalty, they needed to focus a lot on ethics and improving their business practices. And so most firms, they gave these tasks to the CEO, these ethical tasks. But because the CEOs were very busy with other responsibilities, these ethical tasks were falling through the cracks and they weren't getting done as thoroughly as they needed to be getting done. So firms decided to consolidate all of these responsibilities into one new position, which they call the Chief Ethics Officer. So in a nutshell, a Chief Ethics Officer is pretty much someone who is simply given the task of being responsible for all of a corporation's ethical duties. So, is a Chief Ethics Officer really needed? Well, as we can see from all of these scandals that I've already talked about, that's reason enough to need a Chief Ethical Officer. These Chief Ethical Officers are put in place in order to combat these scandals and stop them from happening, in order to give consumers more confidence in the business world. Besides that reason, an alarming study has shown that 56% of MBA students admit to cheating. Now, if you're going to cheat through school, you're most likely going to cheat in your career. So if chief ethics officers are employed, they can use their time and their resources in order to better train employees and keep them from acting unethically, and keep them honest and reliable, and employees that have integrity. So what kind of benefits do Chief Ethics Officers bring besides helping employees become more ethical and keeping them on track? Well, the number one thing is companies that employ Chief Ethics Officers and who have a strong dedication to ethics outperform companies that aren't as ethically motivated, as ethically focused. Consumers are much more loyal to corporations that they view to be ethical. Also, corporations that are ethical and attract ethical employees and people who are going to work hard and work honestly and work morally. And all these things help corporations that are ethical outperform those that are not. Another huge benefit is thanks to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, firms that have chief ethics officers and have strong ethical practices in their corporations actually can receive reduced fines in case they are prosecuted for unethical dealings. So in the event that a chief ethics officer is unable to prevent or stop or detect an ethical act going on in their corporation, and somebody prosecutes the corporation, their fines will be less than if they didn't have that chief ethics officer and that ethical devotion, I would say. So that's another great benefit. So I've talked about what they are and the benefits they provide, but I haven't really talked yet about what exactly their specific responsibilities are. So the number one thing that they do is they create the ethical culture at the corporation, which is a very important task. They set the tone at the top. They make sure, upper management sets a good example for lower management. They set the ethical guidelines, the ethical codes. They write the mission statements, the vision statements. They're responsible for social responsibility, all that stuff to kind of create that ethical culture that employees need in order to act ethically. Second, another huge task they have is to train employees. They need to provide employees with information about what kind of dilemmas they may be facing in their jobs and how they can solve them, how they can combat them. They also need to give them resources in which the employees can go to for help when they do experience ethical situations. Lastly, they are a huge responsibility of theirs is to be enforcers. They set these ethical guidelines, the ethical tone, so they need to enforce those guidelines and those codes and those principles. They need to keep employees in line, keep employees acting ethically. If they find out about unethical dealings, they need to quickly correct them, stop them, and fix them in order to ensure an ethical corporation. So, in conclusion, I talked about what a chief ethics officer is and their duties to the corporation in providing ethical practices, as well as the benefits they provide, such as outperforming the competition and reduce fines for prosecution. I thank you for your time.